I'm going to skip some of these other internationals, right? There's Lenin's Second International. There's another, the Third International. The goal, however, by the 1850s of the revolution, the revolution is directed out of London by the 1850s, seeking a European-wide socialist revolution. By the 1850s, out of London, the Marxists are intending to implement European-wide socialist revolution. And how is this so? How did they do this? How was this so successful? Well, one of these was the establishment of the Labour Party in the UK. Now, the Labour Party is just for the conversion of the UK to this, right? European Union will be a key for how to convert the entire EU to this. The Labour Party would be established precisely for the intent, explicit purpose to do this in the UK through the implementation of Fabianism. And Ratu makes the point that if Marx really wanted to help the working people, it was not to work with big capital. Why would he be working with monopoly capital if he really wanted to help the people? Wouldn't he go back to what the workers wanted at this time? The Luddites? Why were they mad about the textiles and the machines and the industrialization? Because it was taking away their jobs, right? Well, then wouldn't the logical move to have been to go back to what was prior to the Industrial Revolution, the monopoly capitalists? No. According to Marx, the thought was no, move towards allying with big capital. Thus, Marx praises capitalism. And I've said this for years, and everybody's sort of mystified when I say this. What? Especially the libertarians. They go crazy when they hear this. Deer in the headlights. What? What are you talking about? Marx was not against capitalism. Did you not know this? Marx thought capitalism had these problems and these abuses, but that it was a necessary phase in the scientific phases of history. And Marx recognized, even before, remember guys, we talked about this in H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells called out his fellow idiot Marxists by saying, guys, we don't have to be against capitalism. Capitalism is the engine, like no other engine, that will build the global infrastructure. Capitalism will erect the infrastructure according to, and I didn't even realize this was in Marx, or if I did realize this, I forgot. I had my Marx undergrad and grad classes a long time ago. Okay, this is like 2005, 6, 7. So a lot of this I don't remember. But Marx praised capitalism because of its, number one, revolutionary origins. It was a phase out of medieval feudalism and monarchy, and it was able to bring forth the setting in Marx's mind for the revolution to socialism. So that was his logic, is what I'm trying to say. But Ratu makes the point that Marx's revolution from the outset was never concerned with what was good for workers. Marxism, in fact, is naturally pro-state capitalism. In fact, Lenin used the principles of mass production that the capitalists developed. And if you guys have watched that movie that we've talked about for many years, I think Jamie and I did an analysis of it, Branded. If you remember that Russian movie, at the beginning, the guy who works in advertising and mass media, they're like, well, how did you learn your strategies of mass media? He says, for capitalism, he says, by Lenin. They're like, what? And well, where did Lenin learn it? From Taylorism and Ford. Taylorism and Ford had a huge influence on Lenin. And that makes perfect sense, of course, because although Henry Ford was not a Bolshevik, Henry Ford was a big fan of socialism, as I'm sure everybody knows. Ford, of course, was not so anti-Bolshevik that he didn't do business with Bolsheviks. I don't know if you guys knew this. Oh, you 4chaners out there, did you know that Henry Ford did a lot of business with the Bolsheviks? In fact, he supplied the Bolsheviks with trucks and cars. Capitalist monopolists like Ford could look forward to doing brisk business with the new socialist regime in Russia. Britain's Labour Party was demanding that the UK government give loans to the Bolsheviks. Well, there you go. Thus, Ratu says, socialism is a form of monopoly capitalism. And once you grasp that, everything makes sense. Does it really matter if it's the CEO of Pepsi over here and his Pepsi thing, or if it's Kim Jong-il over here and his thing over here? I mean, don't you see that they're kind of the same? What's the big difference between state capitalism and socialism? I don't really see the difference. socialism and monopoly capital are the same, Ratu concludes. And that's pretty much been our thesis, my thesis, for, I don't remember, for as long as I can remember. Even when I was taking my undergrad Marxist praxis history Frankfurt School classes and grad classes. Even in those classes, mainstream university classes, my Frankfurt School trained professor was saying Marxism isn't anti-capitalist. This is a mistake, people think. This is a misunderstanding. It's a propaganda basic bitch misunderstanding. In fact, Marxism could never have worked if it had not had select big money capitalist interest behind it. So that's the normal university course information that you get. So I learned this in undergrad and grad school, and then I am out here in the world of internet arguing and debating with people, and people have never heard this. They think it's crazy. What? It's just some bizarre conspiracy theory. What? It's a conspiracy theory. I mean, Ingalls was a wealthy stock owner. Lord Milner and his crew are the brain, the engine behind the Fabians. And we're actually going to get to who exactly we're talking about. Then he gets to the section that we covered in Sutton, where Sutton had discussed the Lloyd George government flipping and supporting the Bolsheviks due to the influence of Lord Milner. And we're going to get into Milner's kindergarten and the roundtable groups and John Ruskin and all that. That's all going to be coming up. So Wall Street, as Sutton points out, supported Bolsheviks, just like Milner supported Lord George and the Fabians. Same principles here. And it's not just Lord Milner, it's a bunch of the other clique of that clique, including Rothschild. Liberal capital then has always been the backbone of socialism. And again, it's just so hard to get people, they just can't grasp this. I don't know why. I mean, it's in all the academic literature that's not from complete normie academics. It even came up in my normie academic classes. And how can people not figure this out? I mean, take, for example, the Federal Reserve System and the graduated income tax and the fiat money and all that, the central bank plan. That's in the Communist Manifesto. That's the planks of the Communist Manifesto. Did you know David Rockefeller was, at one time, head of the New York Federal Reserve? I mean, it's not rocket science here. Then he mentions some of the key figures that will pop up. Beatrice Webb and Sidney Webb, along with George Bernard Shaw, will be these key players in the movement and promotion of Fabian socialism. So these are not directly connected to Karl Marx, although it's speculated that George Bernard Shaw might have met Karl at some point, because I think he had some dalliance, or he tried to spit game at Karl Marx's daughter, I think. But basically what we're getting at here is that when we get more specific in terms of Fabianism, he says, understandably not... he says, The Guardian, which is a paper run by Rothschild associates Paul Myers and Anthony Sauls and their gullible followers, that the financiers who bankroll world socialism also bankroll the rebellions against themselves. Occupy Wall Street, for example, had money from Soros. This is a classic example. The purpose of this tactic is then to mislead opposition and to trick the political system into introducing further banking control and centralization. This is a key demand that both Marx and Engels mention in the Communist Manifesto. That's exactly what I just said, the planks. Thus, while smaller, honest banks are struggling, offending global giants like Lazard, JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, Rothschild are growing their links to one another. And by the way, they get bailed out, right? This is actually a strategy, a technique. These same players have a key influence on the Fabians. These same players will also be crucial in the United Nations and the notion of world socialism itself. So world socialism in all of its forms will have a key origin in these figures. Why does socialism catch on? Well, socialism catches on and becomes global because it is fundamentally about global governance. Now, sure, every empire ever wanted to be a global empire, sure. So that's not what's particularly surprising. But what is, I think, surprising is that each of the movements of Marxism itself carried with it the title of international, right? The first international with Karl Marx, the second international in 1889, and then Lenin's international, which I guess is the third international. I get these kind of phases mixed up, but and then that didn't really go away. It might have gone away in the classic Marxist sense, but it didn't really go away because this is to quote the 1962 Oslo Conference. The Socialist International made a position very clear. Our ultimate objective is, the parties of the Socialist International, to establish nothing less than a global government. It is a first step towards it in that we seek to strengthen the UN, that it might become more and more effective. Membership in the United Nations must then be made universal. So that was the 1962 Oslo Conference of Socialism, the Socialist International. The Socialists also supported the establishment of the League of Nations as well. That's the prior instantiation of the United Nations as a result of World War I. The Socialist International supported the establishment of a British Commonwealth and the European Community way early. And guess what? Remember, guys, where did we see that the EU was born in terms of Esterlin's book on Biberg, the Biberg group? Out of Biberg in the 50s, not the 90s, the 50s. And the same people were the same ones calling for United Nations-based socialism. With capitalist collaboration, the main nation's driving force behind these steps towards socialism is the dominant ideology to be found in the Soviet Union, Europe, China, and even now in the liberal socialism that's emerging in the United States. So he's writing in 2012, so he's saying up into the present day, this is the same. This is still spreading. Okay, so even though it might have shed the stupid parts of Marx's early ideological nonsense, it is able to evolve and morph. How? Through the Fabian strategy. Ratu goes on to talk about how pretty much everybody from 1946 to 1992 in the United Nations have all been public avowed socialists. Remember Tedros? He's another good example of this, right? These kinds of figures, right? Then he gets to socialism in the EU, the KALERGI plan. That is a form of socialism in 1931. And then we have this character, I guess I forgot about him, Sir Arthur Salter. And Salter is the one who really said, no, we need a straight up socialist European Union. Where's Salter come in? In 1951, Salter, from the Fabian Society, served as the head of the economic financial section of the League of Nations, then published a collection of papers called the United States of Europe, which explored how there could be a federated Europe in 1931. No, wait, 31 or 61? 31, wow. So this is actually 20 years before Estelin says Bilderberg said, let's do the EU. Okay, so the Fabians had planned what Bilderberg talked about 20 years earlier in this character, Sir Arthur Salter from the Fabian Society. So there you go. See, there you go. Now this makes sense why Alan Watt so long ago was talking about all this actually being planned by the Royal Society earlier than Biberg. Okay, so that this is where he's getting that. So now we know. And this is the book called United States of Europe by Sir Arthur Salter. I need to get that book. I also need to get that book that Quigley makes a lot of reference to by Lord Curtis, The Commonwealth of God. Because that's early as well, that lays out all these same plans. And he's one of these figures in the Fabian circles. So it's interesting too that he doesn't mention, he mentions 1955 founds the Action Committee for the United States of Europe. That must be this plan that comes out of Biberg, Bilderberg, which is in Eslin's book. But you can see who's planning this, who's on board with this, you see. All right, what's the logic of this? The logic of this is that socialism is necessary in terms of its internal logic for the destruction of the nation state. In other words, the internal logic of socialism dictates the destruction of the nation state. Why is that? And none of the typical analysis out there can really grasp this. But it's not that hard to grasp if you think about it, because liberal economic theory out of the Adam Smith, Ricardo schools, right? This stuff. This, ironically, leads to the establishment of an international law which undergirds free enterprise, free market commerce. And I don't think that's that controversial. If you guys remember, Kant has a whole essay about how if we have an international government that allows for free trade, we won't have war anymore. Remember, Kant has a whole essay on this. So Kant was actually an Enlightenment era internationalist in that regard. He didn't favor communism or the destruction of the nation state. But here's the irony of this position, because the establishment of the international law for the sovereign nation states is the logic behind the idea of the establishment of international law that gets rid of nation states. If we have international law for commerce, why wouldn't we just have international law that gets rid of the nation states? Then we won't have war anymore, dude. And this is literally the propaganda line here. Oh, we won't have war anymore, man. One world, man. One world, dude. We're all world citizens, man. Yeah, dude. It's one world, dude. Remember when Coldplay was playing the Super Bowl like 4 or 5 years ago? And their whole thing was a big rainbow, and it's one world, man. Yeah, man. One world. One world, dude. So you can see the logic then of move to international law, which it makes sense. I'm not saying it doesn't make sense to have international law, but it makes sense for for them to go the step further and say, well, if we have international law for the nation states, then doesn't it seem to stand the reason that we should get rid of the nation states and have international states or an international state? Liberal economics gives you international law and nation states, but then that gives way to international socialism, where there's international law and a world government and a world state. Because we'll get rid of war, dude. The key here then would be to create, as Lenin said, not a national culture, but an international culture, a global culture. Quote, we are against national cultures. We want international culture. That's Lenin. This will create a truly democratic, equal proletarian, he's saying. What? Yeah, so if you're all Gumby people, you'll all be equal, right? If you just turn into Gumby, dude, then you'll be equal. In 1966, the British Labour Party passed the 1948 British Nationality Act, which argued that all inhabitants of the British Empire should freely live and work in the UK itself, and that this was the key to an open society, a fair society, and diversity, etc. And what does it do? Well, have you been to London? Thus, global capitalism builds the New World Order for socialism. This is the idea and the mindset of the Fabians and the Labour Party. They believe this. So while they may not want capitalism as the end goal, as both Marx and H.G. Wells said, global capitalism will build the infrastructure that we will convert, they say, to the socialist world order. Amazing. This then is why ISLAM is a tool for the changing of Europa, we'll say. And I think you can figure that out. You can put those puzzle pieces together, I'm sure, right? All right, if you would, guys, to support us by liking and sharing, and if you wanted to do the super chats, you can. I want to remind you guys, too, that one way to combat toxic socialism is by equally toxic masculinity. It's basically a yin-yang system where they fight each other for all eternity. But in the end, we know the toxic masculinity will come out on top, because the logic of this goofy system dictates that even nature itself must be warred against, because nature isn't fair and equal. And we know that that's obviously the case. And in order to be in tune with nature, we want to be healthy. And to be healthy, we want to utilize products that are even perhaps better than organic and that increase our toxic masculinity points. Are you having shrinking balls? You want to explode them testicles? Well, the way to do that is testosterone. Is there any products out there that, along with a healthy diet, increase testosterone? Well, yes, there is. There's the Tomcat Ali, which I highly recommend, and I do take. And you can get that over at chalk.com. That is the show sponsor, CHOQ.com. They offer a 50% discount for listeners to viewers of Jay's Analysis. They're big supporters of us, and also, as you guys know, of Tristana. But we have the promo codes that are the best, and they actually work. So you want to use the promo code JAY50, JAY50 over at chalk.com. Put in that promo code, you get 50% off anything, including the Tomcat Ali, which is a rainforest-sourced adaptogen. Let's get back to that crazy covert society, the Fabians. Fabianism, according to Ratu, is the world's most influential social, political, economic, and cultural movement. Wow, vast claim, grand claim. Does he back it up? I think he does. And so if that's the case, well, we need to be aware of that if we're going to know geopolitics of the 20th century. If we want to be accurate historians, and we do want to be that. One of my other degrees, I'd have a history degree. I was 2 classes away from a double major. I'm almost a degree in history as well. So I want to know the most influential political economic movement. Sure, yeah, I want to know that. It's called Fabian socialism. This was an intentional movement for global reach out of almost invisible London headquarters. From humble beginnings, they were able to ascend to this high level of status and influence throughout the 20th century. And he's got a little picture here that's very helpful. You see this little picture. You can see the original Fabian club there. They had an espresso bar. They had an espresso bar right there, where you go and you snort your espresso and you get all hyped up to talk about the means of production and George Bernard Shaw and all this nonsense. And then the other little door is the upstairs society. Now, the Fabians weren't really a secret society. They existed and operated in the open, but they were covert in the sense that they were covert about their means and methods of permeation. Permeation. This is their term for their strategy of infiltration, string pulling, power grabs, and subversion. Now, they weren't subversive in political assassinations and destroying economies. It wasn't like that. It was more so ideological influence. Let's work with magazines that are liberal. Let's work with professors and schools that are liberal. Let's type up our pamphlets and spray them out everywhere across London or whatever. They describe themselves as, quote, a moral society for the expansion of socialist, Marxist, quote, morals. Fabianism takes its name from Quintus Fabius Maximus, the Roman general dictator who, against superior Carthaginian forces, decided that a gradual establishment of attack and strategy would be better than a outright confrontation, because it would lose. And so thus, you can see, that's old Roman general name. He wasn't a socialist. I mean, he was a Roman general, so he had probably the Roman fascia going on, right? But the Fabians had the idea to take this name as a strategy for the gradual slow kill implementation of Marxism, aka reformed Marxism, known as Fabian socialism. They were obsessed with the idea of the political economy. So whereas George Bernard Shaw, who had become infatuated with Marx at an early age, was originally a rabid radical Marxist, he realized, as many Marxists did, that when Marx's predictions for revolutionary proletariat didn't come to pass, that there had to be some tweaking to the system. So the tweaking to the system led to this emphasis and obsession with what they call political economy, political economics. And it began as a reading circle at the Hampstead Historic Club, where Marxist theories of value and other inventions were discussed and heatedly debated. And this, no doubt, fueled the Fabian obsession with their term, quote, political economics. This obsession resulted in the establishment of the British Economic Association, the BEA. However, this became titled, get this, the Royal Economic Society, was the Royal Economic Society from 1902. So the 1902 Royal Economic Society is the British Economic Association of Fabians. The London School of Economics and similar economic outfits, the very prominent LSE, London School of Economics. A lot of the elite come out of the LSE. It doesn't mean everybody who went there is a Fabian socialist, a part of a secret society, but it means that the institution exists to promote Fabian socialism. Contrary to the Fabian apologetic, the fact that Thomas Davidson, who's a leading Fabian, as well as other leading Fabians and teachers from money power controlled universities, were also involved in the founding of the American Association in Saratoga. So the American Economic Association was set up as a Fabian outpost in, Saratoga, Florida. This indicates, as shown below, that far from being the creation of selfless, poor, organic idealists, Fabian socialism from the outset served a financial elite. The four key socialists of the first phase of Fabianism were Sidney Webb, Sidney Oliver, Graham Wallas, and George Bernard Shaw. George Bernard Shaw is the playwright who, of course, would put into his plays a lot of the Fabian socialist ideas. So these four become kind of the brain trust, I guess you could say, of the original society, and they had a lot of connections and buddies at Oxford, like Graham Wallas was at Oxford, and they became the, quote, Big Four. So these are the leadership and the original Fabians, the Big Four. From these Big Four comes the idea of permeation. Permeation is the strategy of socialism by stealth, not by outright revolution. This eventually gained the term Reformed Marxism. So the Fabians are also at times called the Reformed Marxists. The Fabian permeation strategy, in Shaw's own words, was, quote, wire pulling within governments in order to get socialism measures passed. This became a key policy of Fabians, particularly promoted by Beatrice and Sidney Webb, who loved their scheming, quote unquote. Fabianism is thus permeation is key to understanding the Fabian idea of infiltration. This is where we get this bizarre, and we'll probably close here because we've been going for a long time. But then again, I talked about Bitcoin for like 30 minutes. But if you guys would, again, please hit like and share, support the stream, support via the Streamlabs Super Chat there. Wolf in sheep's clothing. This is where it gets really interesting. The Fabians adopted a couple images, one of which will eventually be a turtle for the slow implementation of socialism. The other being the wolf in sheep's clothing. I mean, do you need me to explain that symbol for you? This all exemplifies the subversive nature of the Fabian project. George Bernard Shaw in 1910 commissioned a stained glass window, which we'll show from left to right, where Fabian leaders, Edward Peace, Sidney Webb, and Bernard Shaw himself, are forging a new world order. The other Fabians below them kneel in a worshipful stance next to a stack of Fabian writings. So this takes on a blasphemous religious style. Now, the Fabians said, oh, it's just a joke, right? Shaw had this stained glass window made as a joke, but it actually exemplifies the truth. The motto of the window is, I can't read my notes. I don't even know what that says. The motto of the window reads, remold the world closer to our heart's desire. Whose heart? Satan's heart. The Fabians expressed their plans then to destroy and reconstruct society along Fabian lines. The wolf in sheep's clothing became a key symbol here. The wolf above the globe holds a red flag with the initials of ES. What is it? The Fabian window, as it is known, was executed by Caroline Townsend and is now located, I don't know what I mean, executed, moved, is now located at the London School of Economics. He doesn't say what the ES stands for. ES, English Socialism. I have no idea what it says. As proof of its enduring significance, British socialists had the window unveiled in 2006 by Prime Minister Tony Blair. So it still exists. Tony Blair liked it, but he unveiled it publicly. And, quote, according to Blair, that he was a committed Fabian who stood for the very ideas that Shaw stood for, recognizable in today's Labour Party. So that's according to the London School of Economics News and Media website, quoting Tony Blair himself. So no need to consider this as some kind of conspiracy theory when it's admittedly in the open. The world through Fabian eyes is seen in the Fabian window, and you can see it here for you guys. I'll show you the window. Make sure you can see the light there. So there's the, at the bottom is all the goofuses worshiping their stack of inane, boring, nonsense writings. And then you see them hammering out, hammer and sickle, hammer and anvil, right? The workers of the world unite. And there you see the wolf in sheep's clothing. I mean, what does that tell you? And so you can see that even though this is supposed to be a joke, it actually is like a cult. It is cult-like. Where did the money come from? Who is funding the Fabian Society? Well, Marx himself, as we said, had a secret society that he set up called the Communist League. The Fabians, although they weren't a strictly speaking secret society, would use the same idea of an inner core of intellectual elite, and they would get money from Cadbury. And by the way, they come up in Quigley. Yes, Cadbury. I'm pretty sure that's it says the Cadbury chocolate, so it's got to be the nasty Cadbury eggs, right? And another family called the Roundtrees. I think they had something to do with chocolate or food, something. Roundtree, who were the chocolate manufacturers, and the Fabian sponsors, Cadbury. So basically, two big chocolate companies. So you can thank chocolate for the destruction of the world order, right? How the new world order? How did Marx become? How did what new world order? But chocolate, dude, from chocolate. They were infiltrating through chocolate Easter bunnies the whole time, baby. Now that's not the only family, but they were early phase Fabian money comes from them. Then Shaw finds himself in the circles of very elite people, very wealthy people, and they called this remember the wire pulling that we had referenced earlier? They also called it, quote, catching millionaires. Catching millionaires on wire pulling allowed for the moving of all the forces that they had control over to spur Shaw to write a pamphlet called Socialism for Millionaires. This apparently started a, quote, millionaire movement that converted Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie Endowment, Carnegie Foundation. Steel magnate Andrew Carnegie was then followed by John Davison Rockefeller Sr. of Standard Oil and Henry Ford of Ford Motor, who found, apparently, Shaw's pamphlet, Socialism for Millionaires, convincing. Thus, Bernard Shaw influenced David Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Ford. Now, I mean, who actually believes that these people were seriously interested in helping the public? Come on. No, they saw this as a tool for power, for centralization of wealth and transference of wealth offshore. Thus, they were also connected to and formed their Fabian model on Lord Milner's previous secret society. Prominent position in this network was held by the infamous Milner Group, which was part of the Fabians. So they're overlapping. It became a parallel organization to the Fabians. The Milner Group began as a small, highly intellectual secret society established in 1891 by diamond magnate Cecil Rhodes. That's in John Roberts' public biography of Cecil Rhodes, not a conspiracy theory. It's in Quigley. Together with Lord Alfred Milner and Nathan Rothschild, they bankrolled the Rhodes Trust, or the Bayet Trust, with the Astors, the Lazard brothers, and this is all mentioned in Quigley. So he cites Quigley. They also had close relationships with the banking houses of the Anglo-American establishment, J.P. Morgan, Carnegie, and other elite members of America's Eastern Seaboard establishment. Exactly. They were also influenced by Arnold Toynbee. Toynbee's imperial model of socialism. Although supportive of the empire, Lord Milner was a Marxist. He believed in a noble form of socialism. He and his group derived their ideology from Arnold Toynbee and John Ruskin is key to. I don't know if he mentions Ruskin. Socialist theories of social reform eventually led to the dissolution of the British Empire, while the Fabians then dominated the labor movement. The Milner Group operated mainly in liberal and conservative circles. The Milner Group operated in liberal and conservative circles, control of fake left and right. And George Bernard Shaw, by the way, did not just work with Fabians, he also worked for the Milner Group. So he was in both of these groups. Now, fascinating next section. Guess who else got all tied up in these Fabian circles? Somebody that we recently covered. And I didn't actually know that she was involved in these circles. I mean, I knew she kind of had this socialist bent, but who's a couple goofuses that we recently covered? Remember her 10-point plan to take over Christianity in the world? Where did this goofy woman, witch woman, where did she get her plan to take over Christianity in the West? It wasn't from her. She's a goofus, a goofy witch. Annie Besant. And I would add also by extension, it's got to be Alice Bailey and Blavatsky as well. Remember our stream on Bolshevism and espionage, where we got into Besant, Bailey, and Bolshevik spies? This is a big puzzle piece. Do you see this? Interesting. So now we can link the Bolsheviks to Annie Besant, which we knew about this through Blavatsky. Remember that? And who was that other weird guy? What was that stream? I just did it the other day. You guys remember this? Anyway. But this is what will link Blavatsky to espionage networks. Is that the stream? No, that's not it. I'm pretty sure I did this. Let me find the stream, because this is really relevant to right here. Because his next section, he's going to get into the New Agers. Because the New Agers at the turn of the century played a key role because they were Fabians. I mean, I guess I should have realized this, but sometimes the obvious dot connectors, right, that are staring you in the face, like you just, it doesn't click with you until later. So let's see here. What was that stream? It was I think it's the Annie Besant stream. It's either that or the Guru stream. I can't remember which one it is. We did two kind of similar streams. Okay, the Wicca New Age cults and creepers. No, occult spies. I think I talked about it. Okay, it's in both of these. 10-point New Age takeover plan. Where do you think? So this is like a Fabian thing. So here is the occult spies talk. That's a good one. That's a partial talk, but it mentions her. And then here is the full Guru stream about Annie Besant. So here's that. And guys, now does it make sense why Bailey, Blavatsky, Besant are the philosophy of the United Nations officially? Boom, now it all clicks. Why? Because they're Fabians. And they're in the circles of these people. So the New Age movement is essentially promoted and created by these people to foster world socialism for the banking corporate elite. Bam. There you go. John Passmore Edwards in the 1840s worked for the Sentinel. This is a Manchester, I guess, a publication, which became a liberal publication that promoted what became known as the Manchester School, a liberal movement that advocated free trade. So notice the key, the pre-Marxist, the proto-Marxist publications that helped Marx get started are international peace movements advocating for free trade. I mean, libertarians, do you hear this? Do you hear this? This allows John Passmore Edwards to make a partnership with Andrew Carnegie. So we're going back to the 1800s because, again, you can't get to the Fabians and this stuff without understanding the influence of all these early 1800s and mid 1800s, late 1800s magazines. Pall Mall Gazette, the Triumphant Democracy magazine, the Sentinel. Okay, these are all liberal, the North American Review, liberal 1800s publications promoting free trade that allow Marxism to come in, which produces Fabianism. Fabianism then influences the United Nations, the whole EU structure, the London School of Economics, and is thus promoted by the Anglo-American elites. And that's everything that's in Quigley. So you read this in Quigley, you got the whole picture. Manchester School liberalism was necessary to pave the way for Marxism and its slogans, etc. They also found alliance with different other secret societies. For example, Besant and some of the Fabians said we should also infiltrate and utilize Freemasonic circles. The slogans of the Fabians and the Marxists and the Fabians was free trade, world peace, universal brotherhood, philanthropy. Now that the later Fabians might not have liked free trade, but early Marxists were like, yes, free trade, universal brotherhood, world peace. There's actually a thing, I think it was on Marxist.org, where Marx was arguing for free trade and open borders. I'm not kidding, because he thought that would entice the workers to be angry. Because if you had open borders, the workers would get angry because they would realize that that's an attack on the local indigenous working population. So Marx actually says, no, let it happen because it'll get them mad. So much for being a man of the people, right? Other famous Fabians hopped on board, like Lord Balfour and Lord Stead, which we covered in Quigley's book. And here's one I knew this guy was a mover and shaker in terms of later social engineering and whatnot, but I did not know that he was actually in the Milner Group and the Fabian Society. In fact, maybe Quigley mentions it in Anglo-American Society. Walter Lippmann was a member of both the Milner Group and the Fabian Society. This is wild. As we said, from Sutton, Lord Milner is who influences Lord George and Flip in the UK policy to support Bolshevism. Now, we've talked in the past about David Rockefeller in his memoirs, where he speaks of his influence by von Mises, right? So he had written papers about von Mises and libertarian economics. But we have to keep in mind that he was also influenced by Fabians. And David Rockefeller got some of his schooling under one of these famous Fabians. What was his name? David Rockefeller was influenced by Fabianism. He had written a sympathetic thesis on Fabianism at Harvard. His family was provided sizable grants to the London School of Economics, which helped influence them. The Laura Spelman Rockefeller Memorial Fund, the Rockefeller Foundation. Tellingly, the family, all of the family's leaders, all three of them, the sons, studied under Lasky. So the character is named Lasky at Harvard. Who is this guy? Marxist, Fabian Marxist Harold Lasky. So this is where we get that. The early teachers at the London School of Economics were Graham Wallas, Bertrand Russell. Anybody heard of him? Anybody heard of him? Who was in the Fabian Society for a time? Guys, remember? Hello? Remember that guy that idiot pagan guy trying to call me out on Twitter for a footnote that Bertrand Russell wasn't part of all. Oh, dude, was a Fabian. What are you talking about? So Fabianism had its influence at Harvard, as well as Oxford, as well as obviously the London School of Economics. And let's see, Lasky himself, another academic at Harvard, was the Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter, who was actually a Fabian pretending to be a liberal Democrat. This is who David Rockefeller had the honor of being drilled in the arcane arts of leftist economics. That's citing David Rockefeller himself on page 79. Before making the acquaintance of Harold Lasky at the London School of Economics, and I'm pretty sure in David Rockefeller's memoirs he does mention LSE. I don't remember if he mentions Lasky, but probably. Yep. So let's see. So to be clear here, David Rockefeller was influenced by both von Mises and the Fabians. You see, and that helps to explain his approach to the blending of what he supports, basically state capitalist socialism. Let's call it that. Corporate communism. And this is where we get, of course, the CFR and these kinds of things. So from Rockefeller, obviously. All right. So next, he's going to move into things that the Fabians pushed for: public education, socialization, and that gets us to. He doesn't mention, but in America, you have William James, Horace Mann, John Dewey. I think William James was in that, right? And they're American socialists who are pushing for public schooling, which Blavatsky said in the Fabian magazine. So the Fabians had a magazine called The New Age. In the Fabian magazine, the New Age magazine, Blavatsky says in there, unless that's different from the Scottish Rite New Age magazine, but maybe they're the same thing. I don't know. But in the New Age magazine that Blavatsky wrote for, she said that public schooling would be the means by which children would be socialized to become world socialists, and the utopia would be brought in. So that shows us that Blavatsky is directly she's pretty much has to be an agent of these people, right? As well as Blavatsky, Besant, Bailey. I mean, their philosophy is still the official philosophy of the United Nations, and that's a Rockefeller creation. Not just Rockefeller, but also these people, right? Milner-Fabian, Rockefeller. So the Fabians influenced Lord Balfour, who then influenced one of the Rothschilds, Nathan Rothschild, who was thought to be rather conservative. However, he seems to have been influenced by Fabians. That also became a source of money for the London School of Economics and also the Imperial College. This is wild. So the Imperial College also became sort of permeated of London Fabianism. In addition to the LSE, another classic example of close collaboration between Fabians and big finance is the Imperial College of London, set up by Sidney Webb with funds from Werner Beit and Company, the gold diamond mining company. Well, that's Cecil Rhodes, right? The purpose of the Fabian permeation was, according to accurately described by Beatrice Webb in her diary. She reviewed the society's advancements and noted in her book Industrial Democracy that it had been extraordinarily well received. Indeed, the volume 1 of the 1897 book was translated into Russian by Vladimir Lenin and his later secretary and wife, Krupskaya. So Vladimir Lenin and Beatrice Webb are BFF, apparently. Big fans of each other. So again, Fabianism, Leninism, it's not a big deal. They're all kind of doing the same thing. Okay, we're going to stop there because next he gets into the New Age movement and how the New Age movement really is 100% bound up with these figures and some of these espionage characters that we mentioned before. Who is that? Who is that spy that I mentioned in the that was working with the Bolsheviks? Remember that guy? I know these names just went blank. So Blavatsky, Bailey, Besant. And there was that Bolshevik guy who some people think might have been her handler. So basically, the Theosophical Society is more or less the same crew. But you'll notice that the reason we're doing this, the reason this book is so crucial, is that it's going to really give us the background and the understanding of what's going on in our world today. I mean, how do we get to, Klaus and Davos? It's this, literally this. This is the precursors, the preparatory ways to which we get to Klaus. And that helps us understand that we're not dealing with straight up Marxists.